Hey, and welcome to the Growing Leaders Podcast. This podcast exists because the topic of growing next generation leaders is super important.
Boy, is it.
Hi, Jamie.
Hey, Christine. How you doing?
Pretty good.
Great. What are we talking about today?
We're talking about innovation and how it fits into your business, your mission, your ministry, and why it's really important.
Yeah, we have a special guest, Jon Hirst, with us today, who's with Generous Mind.
Generous Mind.
That's right. He's going to be at the conference next week.
Yes, he'll be at the conference next week. He's one of our main speakers, and he'll have a workshop.
Yeah, that's the Love Your City Conference. That is May 29th.
Through June 1st.
Through June 1st, 2025.
Yeah.
Just in case you're listening to this.
In the future.
In the future. What's it like there in the future? Oh, you can't tell us. Okay. This is kind of a funny one. We were talking about this earlier, but isn't it interesting that we would have a guy come and speak at the conference about innovation and creativity the year after the actual theme of the conference was missional creativity?
Yes, though, if I remember correctly, last year, we talked about how missional creativity should just be continuing in your life.
Yeah, so maybe we were prepped or primed by last year's conference to be ready for Jon.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. How big is creativity in your life?
In certain moments, greater than others. But I think it's really important.
So, like, of course, you're kind of a, fancy schmancy design person, and you're a chief strategy officer. So, yeah, you're strategic. But, like, let's say, and if your hat's on as a mom or as a leader within a local church or as a wife and a sister, like, what place does creativity have there?
So like as a mom or as a leader of a small group in my church, something I've learned is you can't just do the same thing every time. Like, because we grow and things build. And so if I serve my daughter the same breakfast every single day over and over again, eventually she's going to look at me like I'm crazy and say, Mom, there are more things in life than this bagel and cream cheese. And she's going to request French toast sticks. But it's like we as people, we grow. It's part of development. If we're in a healthy growing church, then we are growing. And if we have a relationship with the Lord, we're growing. Like we have progressive revelation of more of who he is and what he has for us. And so then there are new ways to relate to the kingdom. There are new ways to do mission.
Great. Let's get to it.
Hey, welcome back.
I've already been here. So it's really, and welcome to you, Jon. It's great to have you on.
It's great to be with you guys. Thanks for allowing me to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, we're pretty excited. Well, to get us started, I think it would be really great to hear how you or what drew you to the innovation space, specifically within ministry, because I think people typically think of innovation within tech or the marketplace, but not in ministry.
Yeah, it is a little different to think about innovation within ministry because so much of what we're doing in ministry is, in one sense, preserving or guarding, right? We're helping to form the next generation of leaders. We're preserving, what it is about our faith that we think is so important. At the same time, one of the things about innovation that actually does fit really well with ministry is that so much of global mission required frontier missionaries to go out into places where really there had not been a church before. And when they got to those places, many of them had to innovate on the fly. They had to come up with new solutions to problems they had never even imagined, right? And so when my wife Mindy and I got out of college, I was in 1998, and here we were just out of college, communications majors, wanting to go into ministry. I'd been raised as a missionary kid, so kind of had that background and that passion in my life. And we got an opportunity to go work with a ministry called One Hope, that does youth and children evangelism through a harmony of the four Gospels. So they take the four Gospels, they put it together into one booklet, and they delivered it through public schools around the world. And they asked us to come and do one of the very early internet evangelism websites, really more interactive. And so that's really what got me started on my innovation journey, because I went to this highly innovative organization, right, entrepreneurial organization that was trying lots of new things, working with the next generation. And they said, hey, we want to do something on the web. We want to do it for teens. We want to reach them for the gospel, but we don't know anything about that. That's a whole new space for us. And so my wife and I just landed there and started working, just figuring it out, and traveling around the world, going to cyber cafes, exploring, what does the internet youth culture of 1998 and 1999 look like? Of course, it's changed.
Very different now.
Sure.
So much, right? You can imagine how all the ways it's changed. But that was really where the start was.
Well, we'll jump back into that because I think that's the exciting stuff to get into. But it is interesting. We were saying in the intro that we last year's conference, the Love Your City conference, was about missional creativity. And so it could seem to some like we brought you in a year too late. However, we were saying it served as a primer to get us ready. And two of the big points that came out of the conference last year were, one is when you're talking about creativity, you start with the creator. He is the fount of all creativity, and wherever the Holy Spirit goes, there's an explosion of creativity. And so we jumped into that piece, which of course kind of reinforces what you just shared. But also the other piece is that when you face these huge intractable problems, these kind of situations that seem to have no solutions, that across history over and over again has been where the creativity of God has exploded into, modern missions. And so we kind of got to talk about a lot of those exciting pieces, including Love Your City. So, what you just shared makes perfect sense. But I would love to have you share some of the places where you have seen, as you've kind of turned your attention towards creativity and towards innovation, what are some of the things that you've seen occur in, whether it's missions or around the kingdom, that have gotten you most excited or stirred your passions most significantly?
Yeah, when you think about innovation, it's a cool concept, right? Imagining the new, right? I use the definition, fresh ideas that create value, right? This idea of new ideas, but that generate value. But when you then apply it or look for evidence of it in ministry, it gets down into the nitty gritty of like how things actually work, right? And as they say, no plan ever survives first contact, with your implementation, right? It's essentially when you have this idea in your mind and then you go try it, something always happens, right? And so what I've noticed with innovation is that it's a desired thing by most people in ministry. People want to be innovative. They want to try new things. Of course they do. When they get on the ground, have they fostered some of the disciplines and skills that will allow them to do it? So for instance, when you think about some examples, let's think of some examples related to urbanization, right? Because so many of the Love Your City events and things happening around the world, of course, are in cities, right? And so when you think about cities, you think about cities as places where it's really hard to get connected with other people because they're very busy, right? And so one example I thought was so fascinating, where I was working previously, a ministry called SIL Global that works with a lot of the Bible translation work around the world. They're focused on the minority languages, right? And they're also focused on what happens when people who speak a minority language move to a city. And all of a sudden they're surrounded by people who are speaking lots of other languages. How do they keep attached and connected to their own language while also fitting in with all the other languages around them? And one group came up with this great idea. I loved it. They decided that to help advance their language within a multicultural and urban setting, they were going to set up a dating app in that local language. And what I loved about that idea, it was so creative, because what they were doing was they were saying, let's help the people that speak that language already, that are desiring, to, find, that love of their life and start their life together and build families. Let's use language as a way to bring them together. Yeah. And then as we bring them together into community, we can start to interact with them around their language and around spiritual life and all those things. And so I thought that was a really cool example in an urban setting that was something very unexpected, right? That you wouldn't have expected or thought about immediately.
That's a great one. I have one more thing and then I'll pass it over to you, Christine. She's always got the better questions. But if we're thinking about then how this translates into not just great big missions agencies or juggernaut groups like that, but we're thinking about just how it relates to the life of an everyday believer that's just living life or working in the workplace or trying to figure out what they're going to do with their lives. These same pieces of creativity and innovation and these ways of thinking that you're really, really good at leading people through, they matter. They say that everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face, and then all of a sudden now you're trying to figure out what happens next. And there's a lot of people that come up with a business plan and launch a business, and then all of a sudden they get pushed back. And then what happens next is often when the really great creative pieces happen that change the world. And the same thing with a bunch of college graduates who get out of school and they have a plan, they get punched in the face, and they all of a sudden are starting to think in new ways. But what are the ways that you've seen some of the kind of design thinking or innovation thinking? How have you seen those things be tools that are really, really helpful for everyday believers' lives?
Yeah, I think I can think of two things that I think are worth zeroing in on because you're right that innovation at a programmatic level is very valuable. But in our personal calling as believers, God is calling us to always be reimagining what we're doing on his behalf based on the situations he puts in front of us. So one of them is leaning into limitations. I think over and over again, I've seen when believers come up against a limitation, right? It could be physical, could be societal, could be situational, whatever the reason might be that there's a limitation in your life. And it's easy to go, oh, I guess I can't do that because there's this problem. I don't have the money, or our family can't move to that city, or whatever the question might be. Those limitations tend to be great opportunities to reimagine things. So instead of saying, oh, because of this limitation, it must mean I can't do this thing that I feel God was calling me to, the better question is to say, oh, okay, so I've got this limitation, but I feel God's called me to this. So what are ways I could accomplish this thing in light of that limitation? And then that ties in closely to the idea of what we call fixed or limited mindsets, right? Or a limited mindset versus an open mindset, where if you've got a fixed mindset, you say, this is all I have to work with, what's in this box. These are my skills, these are the dollars I have, this is what's in my bank account, this is what I've learned in school. And you say, all I can do, all that God can do through me is just what's there. Versus an open mindset where you say, this is the starting place, right? This is what God has given me now, but actually he can do whatever he wants with me. Meaning he could give me $1 million if that's what it took to do the work. He could introduce me to a friend who could open up a whole community that was closed to me before. He could introduce me to someone who has a skill set I don't have, right? That idea that really we are the beginnings, our faithfulness and our obedience is the beginnings of the pathway to what God wants for us, but it's not the end. God has so much more for us if we believe and then obey and then see where God takes us from there and are willing to do the creative new things that God might put into our path.
Well, one comment before you go is just that is so much of the way Jesus is. Like whether it's Road to Emmaus or any moment, like so often the guys around him are struggling because they're kind of coming at it with it's got to be like this.
That's right.
And he is just never doing it that way. So these things that you're talking about, they even are really great on a personal level of like creating the flexibility and the agility just to stick with the one we're following.
What I also really like in what you just said, or maybe this is my interpretation, is that innovation at its core is in response to obedience to what the Lord would be calling you to. Because it would be that then he's just leading us into new places and not just us ideating or iterating or trying something new for the sake of trying something new, but it's in response.
We're digging in our heels because it's supposed to be like this,
But it's in response to his leading or calling into something or a new space. So I really like that.
Well, that's really well said, Christine. I think when I think about obedience, obedience always forces us to do something that someone else is requesting of us that they think we can do. It doesn't mean we are ready or feel ready to do it, right? And so obedience will always be a stretch, right? Because it's not about me being in control. It's about someone else asking me to do something and me agreeing to obey to do that thing, right? So getting out of that space of control and complete knowing, oh, I've got this. In obedience, then you are going to have to think in new ways, because most of the time when you obey, you're obeying to do something that's beyond what you would have done all by yourself.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that shifts probably for me in some ways some of how I viewed it in a helpful way. So I think that's really cool. I'm going to jump back to something previously that you said, just because part of this podcast is around reaching the next generation. You mentioned how you got kind of into innovation was working with One Hope. There was a new, essentially, venture or initiative that they were trying to do in how do they create programming online for young people. I really like that it was something new to fulfill the mission, or this great need. Because again, I think sometimes people think of innovation as just like the new next thing versus as a way to just further the mission. Does that make sense? And so I would love to hear an example or of ways that you've seen that happen in ministry, whether in observing other ministries or ministries that you've worked for, of ways where you've just seen it further the mission versus just mission creep.
And another way to talk about it is you've got incremental innovation, which is tweaking things and playing with things to make it better and better to advance the mission. And then you've got, that kind of breakthrough innovation that's kind of reimagining something. And then you have transformational innovation that just blows the doors off the way we thought about something. Think a la iPhone or, those kind of things, right? And so I think most of the time when ministries think about innovation, they often shy away from it because they're thinking too big a lot of times.
Yeah.
So imagine like an example that I'll use is an example would be like from one of my projects that I did. We were working on a project around children's literacy. Okay. So in children's literacy, especially in local languages, one of the greatest challenges is that both the donors and the parents of the children struggle to want their kids to learn in a local language because they really want to get them set up in the big trade language so they can go to high school, college, get a job, all the things they want to do, right? But the research shows that especially up through third grade, it's really best for the educational outcomes of the children if they go to school in their local language first. It's called multilingual education. And so one of the programs that we designed, we said, okay, multilingual education is a wonderful initiative. The problem is that both donors and parents don't see the value in it. And so we need to not revolutionize the education. We already know that works, right? What we need to do is we need to reframe it in the minds of both the parents and the donors. And so we designed a prototype where we tied the education to a social issue that the community selected. So we went into the community, we said, what's a social issue you would love your kids to learn more about? And they would pick, whether it be clean water or, you can go on and name different issues that they might want to deal with. And then we designed a whole little curriculum in the local language to help them learn to read while dealing with that issue. To the point where we also were giving them like little action plans and helping them actually do some things, plant some trees, or learning how to brush their teeth in a sanitary way, or whatever the issue might be, depending on what the issue they selected was. So what we were doing was we were addressing the fact that donors value addressing social problems right away, right? Whatever language it's in. And parents wanted not only their kids to learn how to read, but also deal with these issues that were real issues in their community. And by tying them together, we were essentially able to tweak local literacy in a way that engaged more people and was more relevant to the people that it was trying to help.
Yeah, it makes me think, some innovation, just a lot of times we're either so stuck in the way that we just think of our lives, and so we're just kind of caught up in the next thing, or we're, like you said, thinking it's got to be so creative that we're waiting to be hit by a star, almost a falling star. But there's so much of innovation that's like recombinant. It's like recombining things in a new way that all of a sudden ignites it into something. It's kind of like MacGyver. MacGyver is always like stuck in some garage in the middle of a jungle, and he really, really needs to create an explosive device. And so he thinks about, well, an explosive device, I would need something that will explode. So he grabs some gasoline and puts it in something. And then he usually would need a spark, and he doesn't have anything. So he takes chewing gum, and then he takes like a paper clip, and he recreates all the pieces that he needs, and it works for what's happening. And so what's really, really great about the work that you do is you do a good job, Jon, of bringing people, all of us, together into these core pieces of how to consider a challenge and how to consider the resources, and then just how to look at, in a kind of what we call design thinking these days, but in a way that's just creative. And what are the ways that we can figure out how to take on these guys outside the garage if I'm MacGyver? So you're turning us all into MacGyvers, I guess is what it is, which I like. I really like that. Thank you.
No, and I think related to that is the fact that I've noticed that innovators tend to be good at integration, right? Which is another way to say what you were just saying, that the idea that a lot of times, like you said, it's not whole new things that you are bringing into the world, but you're combining things in new ways. And that's very valid innovation. In fact, it's some of the most helpful, because you've got these latent things, these things that already exist. And so you don't have to do that work because they're already there. But if you combine them in 2 or 3 different ways, all of a sudden, oh my goodness, it's helping a whole new set of people who never benefited before. Yeah.
That's great. I do have a final question.
Final question. I hear what you're saying. We're short on time.
So anybody could be listening to this. We have a diverse audience, but what would you say to someone in, whether it's marketplace or ministry, that's kind of, they feel stuck and they're realizing it's going to take some innovative thinking or practices to get unstuck? What would be some of the things that you would say to them to help kind of take a step back, reframe, reshape perspective?
Yeah. I think it starts with community. When I've done innovation in different settings, it's always been the richness of community that's generated the new ideas, right? Because we have one perspective in our own minds, right, that we're kind of zeroed in on. But when we involve other people, all of a sudden we think about it in whole new ways, right? We imagine it really, really differently. And so I think if you don't have a community of people who are thinking about the idea with you, that's a huge challenge. Like tomorrow morning, I've got a new idea, and I'm putting together a focus group tomorrow morning, and then going to get 4 or 5 people on Zoom, and we're going to hash through it together. And I know that from that, they're going to come up with 3 or 4 different angles on it that I just would have never imagined, right? So I think one of the pieces is community. And then I think it requires that you be bringing in more inputs than you're typically used to. Meaning, if you don't read a lot or listen to podcasts or however you intake information, you've got to commit to input more, to bring in more inputs, because that's where the combining and the aha moments start to happen, right? And so I think a lot of people, they're such good doers that they're just excited about getting the work done, and they don't take a lot of time to listen to a podcast while they're working out or whatever it might be, and take in some of that new input. And then I think finally is really the spiritual process of it is inviting God into the place you're stuck. God promises. If you look in the Bible, wherever the Israelites were stuck, God had a way out for them. It was obviously a lot of times it was very novel. Like I think about, crossing the Red Sea or the Jordan or walking around Jericho or
It's
Gideon.
all very innovative.
Yeah, I mean, these strategies were very novel ways of leading a battle, right? And so by inviting God into those, it can be a really, really rich way to rethink, because the Holy Spirit is going to reframe. The first time the Holy Spirit is mentioned in the Old Testament, indwelling someone, is when the artisans were working on the tabernacle, right? It's a creative act of bringing about the place of worship for God. And so I think that inviting God in is a huge part.
That's great. I think we should put this to practice. Christine, short on time, what is the most creative way to end this segment?
I would say this is just the
singing. You could sing
we
something.
could sing it. I could sing the next segment. Only if you guys back me up, like the Golden Girls.
Oh man, I'm sorry, John.
No, I would say I think it's really important that this is just the beginning of the conversation. And
Smart.
So if you're listening to this and you want more, then you should be at the Love Your City conference.
That's right.
May 29th through June 1st, because John's speaking and he's going to have a workshop and it's going to be awesome. And if you're listening to this after the fact, then you need to go to the YouTube, Boy the Ball's YouTube account, and watch the recorded segments.
It was very creative. Great to talk to John today.
Yeah, he was great.
Yeah, he's a very nice guy, first of all. And then you can definitely tell that he's the child of a missionary who grew up in Latin America, because he's just thinking slightly different than some guy in Cleveland. Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the thoughts that I had to begin, and then we'll kind of get into some of John's comments as well, but one of the thoughts that I had was the real power of innovation and creativity and this focus is that it forces us to deal with something that is really, really critical to deal with, which is the tendency for believers or for people who hang around churches to get captured into what we call, and it's going to be a big word, but we'll break it down, isomorphic mimicry, versus getting caught up in a living, active relationship with Jesus where they're following him. And so isomorphic mimicry, iso and morphic, it just basically means same shape mimicry. So what that means is, even though we're connecting by coming home to Jesus with the creator of the universe, instead of truly focusing on connecting to him, somewhere along the way we get caught up in just trying to connect in with this group of people in a church or in a Bible study or in any group, or even just in the general culture. And so what we start doing is we start looking at other people and trying to be just like them. And we start to even measure like our holiness or our sanctity by, are we like the good people or are we like the bad people? And it's kind of the I don't smoke and I don't chew and I don't go with the girls that do becomes where it is. And of course that turns into the worst version of wouldn't even call that faith. It turns into the worst version of religion or tradition, where all I'm trying to do is be like that guy or like that thing or like what it was or what it should be even. And the sadness of all that is, I'm not here to criticize the way anybody's practicing their lives, but that is a giant that stands in between you and grabbing onto Jesus's hand and learning how to follow him. And following him, of course, is risky. He is creative. Mm-hmm. He is innovative. He is the creative one, the innovative one. And so you miss out on that. And so there is some part of this conversation of being refreshed or pushed back to look at innovation and creativity as maybe just kind of getting us agile to look back at being ready to truly follow Jesus. So what do you think of that?
So many things. But I think it ties in really well with one of the things that stood out to me most, which was that really innovation is a response to his call. Yeah. Like, because he has... he calls us deeper into new things, or deeper into those things in a new way. But yeah, everything you just mentioned, when we're step into something that we don't know or fully understand, even if it's something he's called us into, but if we step into it with that frame of mind of, oh God, now I have to do this thing, it's really easy to turn to people who've done it and try to just copy what they've done, versus seeking out the help or ask the questions, or even just like find where the Lord is in it. He didn't call you into that place to get stuck or to get lost. He called you into that space to be in it with you. But those are, it's what inhibits innovation or inhibits growth or inhibits his presence even being able to come into it, because then we're kind of insecure and we close off to then anything that could help us. But also another thing that John was saying at the end was that it's really, really important to then seek out community or input. Like, what are your inputs? Because if you're stuck, which is a lot of what you just described, because if really you're just copying what other people are doing, you're kind of stuck in a hard place. Getting as much of the right input in to help you find where the Lord is in it, or find the place out of where you are into the next place, is super important.
Yeah, and what you're describing there is the very core of Christianity, and it was actually the core of all of those who walked across the Bible, including very predominantly Abraham, which is that this walk with Jesus is a life of faith. It's a life that requires us to perceive where he is and what he's doing, and to follow him. And I always, when I get a chance to speak anywhere, I tell stories about, like, if you're following another car at night, particularly pre-cell phone time, and Find My Friends time.
You had an atlas in your backseat of your car?
No, you had to really watch the taillights of the car. And so the only bummer is if you let some distance get between you, you're sure you see those taillights, because taillights are relatively distinctive. But then you pull up to a stoplight and you realize, I've been following the wrong car.
Not the right taillights anymore.
Very terrible situation. But following Jesus is like that. It is athletic. It's this relentless willingness to wake up every day and find him. Our friend Derek Prince used to say, you're a follower of Jesus right now if you are following Jesus. So what you're talking about isn't joining a community where you can do more mimicry of those people, but a community that will help encourage you and help you to get a hold of, what is God saying to you? What has he said through his word? How do you apply that in your life? How do you know him? How do you know his ways? And how do you build a relationship with him that's building in deeper and deeper trust, where you can step out in faith and you can do innovative and creative things? And the biggest truth is, we've just found that you can usually tell that's happening when your life starts to become a little more creative, a little more innovative, right?
Yeah. I think this is a really important conversation, both for anybody as a person or as a follower of Jesus, but then specifically if you find yourself in the marketplace and you're trying to figure out, how do you as a business, or how do you in your marketplace learn to engage mission? It requires that set of muscles. They're new and it's kind of uncomfortable. Or if you're a missional leader and you're trying to figure out how you engage your family within your neighborhood, or within your kids' schools, or in youth ministry, like, these are all, you can copy what everybody else has done, or you can find his ways in it and surround yourself with people who are also looking for his ways in it, or finding his ways in it, and see how it changes you.
Which, by the way, you can also be a young person where you're trying to find your path. You're trying to figure out what happens after high school, what happens after college. Even within high school, what friends do I choose? Who am I? And I think it's the same exact thing. I was with a group of business leaders last week, and a great group of people. They really were some of the great followers of Jesus here in our city. But one of the things that I noticed, it is really easy at times to criticize churches, because churches are a place where people have to be able to come together. So it has to be a solid, stable place. And so, it's really, really easy to say, well, churches are stuck, and a lot of churches are stuck. So that's why it's easy to say that. But I was watching that businesses these days, it is just as easy, maybe a little easier to get stuck too, because while churches might get stuck in the way it's been done before, or some kind of sense of trying to make sure that it's healthy and good and strong and real, businesses can get caught up in, like, will I profit immediately? And is it the most efficient thing to do? And you start to see both of those groups lose out on Jesus. And I think the thing that we'll be saying at the conference next week is that Jesus wants to walk right into your business, and that Jesus wants to dare you as a church to move out into new things. And so I think it's such an important challenge that if you have ended up in the marketplace, or if you are a missional leader within a local church or around a local church, or if you're a young person, you're absolutely right that this life of faith and this life of getting a hold of who Jesus really is absolutely critical. And there is absolutely no reason that you should miss out on it.